Okay, great. Well, first of all, welcome. Thank you for coming to the info session tonight. So, as you're hopefully aware, we're going to be talking about the School of Information Studies Archives concentration. SOAS offers an MLIS program, and within the MLIS program, you can have a specific transcript designation related to archives. And so that's what we'll be talking about tonight. I'll talk a little bit briefly about archives. I'll talk a little bit about the MLIS as a whole, and then we'll dig in deeper to the archives, MLIS, and the different requirements related to that, and just some tips for students that I have thought of and shared widely in the 10 years now that I've been at SOAS. Yeah, this is my 10-year anniversary, so hooray for me. So what I'll do next is I just want to introduce myself, and I also want to introduce in absentia Dr. Force, who is my colleague in the archives program. So yeah, this is me. I'm a teaching faculty 3 at SOAS. As I mentioned, I've been here for about 10 years now. Before I came here, I was an archivist at the University of Wyoming's American Heritage Center in Laramie, Wyoming for 6 years. So I did reference and processing and appraisal, really the whole gamut of archives. And as you can see here, I got my MLIS from the University of Pittsburgh, which is a lovely city if you ever have a chance to go there, and my bachelor's degree from Bowling Green State University in Ohio, which is not as nice as Pittsburgh. So these are the courses that I teach for the most part. So the Intro to Archives course, which I'll talk about in just a little bit, archival outreach, and community archives, which I actually need to update this because I'm proud to report that community archives now has its official course number, so it'll be 758 instead of a 791 course. So it's been a milestone long in the coming, but it's finally done. So a little bit about my research topics. I enjoy learning and teaching about all aspects of archiving, honestly, but I'm especially interested in social justice in archives. So how can archives support social justice efforts? And related to that, community archives, which are archives that are run by community members as opposed to archivists who may not be members of a community represented in archives, which is kind of a disempowering situation for people to find themselves in. And relatedly, community participation in archives. And I'm also interested in how archives influence identity construction, especially among people in underserved communities. And I'll talk about the breadth of the archival field in just a minute, but there's quite a few connections between archives and social justice and identity construction that people might not necessarily think of when they think of archives, but it's definitely a strong component of archival work. Okay, and then my colleague in the archives program is Dr. Force, Donald Force. You can see here. So he has his PhD from the University of British Columbia. He's been at SOAS. I think he came a few years before I did. I'm not sure exactly how many years. I think a couple years before I did. But we've both been here for a while, and we've seen the archives concentration in SOAS develop over time. So here are the courses that he teaches, and we'll touch on a few of these later on when we discuss the different electives for the archives MLIS. But he has more of a focus on digital archives and records management. So I tend to focus more on the humanities side of archives, and he tends to focus more on kind of the technological aspect of archives, which I feel is a good complement, because between the two of us and a lot of the courses that you'll take if you do pursue the archives MLIS will be taught by one of us or the other. You know, we do cover, you know, a wide breadth of the field instead of just focusing on the technical stuff or just focusing on more the humanities side of archives. We cover the breadth of the profession pretty well. which I think is a good thing. Okay. So that's Dr. Force and I. So what I'll do next is just kind of talk about archives in general. I'm not sure how many of you are too familiar with archives. I do see some familiar faces in the list of attendees tonight. So welcome, well, to all of you, but to those of you that I've taught in courses before or are teaching in courses right now. But sometimes people come into the MLIS program and even the archives concentration not knowing a whole lot about what archives are and what archives do. And there tends to be a lot of assumptions about archives that they're mostly focused on preservation and preserving information and providing access to information. And all of that's true, but in a lot of ways, the archives profession is a lot more nuanced and a lot more I guess, varied than people might expect or might realize. So people don't necessarily think of technology as a big component in archives, but that's actually not the case. So when you start looking at digital preservation, which is a huge issue that archives face, preserving digital records, oftentimes that takes very specific types of software used in a very specific way. And so archives have to have the training and the skills to be able to use those programs to preserve digital records so that they're accessible in the future. More and more archives are looking at AI to process information, especially information that's found in digital records. And so that's becoming a bigger part of the profession as well. Using AI tools to find out the content of records or the metadata of records instead of an archivist having to do it in a kind of a slower and more painstaking process. So, again, kind of the typical stereotype of archivists is, they're just kind of people that sit in dusty rooms and push around boxes. And, that's true to a certain extent, but there's definitely a strong technological component related to archives. And there's a strong public-facing component related to archives as well. So, for example, if an archivist is working on the reference desk and helping people answer reference requests, that involves a lot of personal interaction. If an archivist is in a classroom teaching a class or a group of community members how to use archives, that is a very public act as well. Indeed, I feel strongly that archives need to be interacting with the public in order to justify their value and receive the support that they need, which is something that I talk a lot about in my Information Study 752 outreach course. So more and more, it's difficult to be a truly introverted person and be an archivist. And increasingly, archivists are asked to kind of go out into the public and communicate with the public and tell the public why archives are important and why they should be supported. I also I touched on the ideas of social justice earlier, which isn't something that people necessarily connect archives with, but I feel like there are a lot of opportunities for archivists to support social justice, whether it's through the process of appraisal, where archives select records to come into archival custody that represent people that have been marginalized and excluded in the past, and allow them to have their memory seen in archives and their memory retained in society and in social memory, whether it's through archivists working with community members to make sure that records are being preserved in a socially and culturally responsible way. Another example would be archives conducting outreach to people that aren't typically represented in archives in order to let them know, hey, your perspective is important, your records are important, and either we would like to help you preserve them, or maybe we can teach you ways that you might think about preserving them as well. So there's definitely a strong connection between social justice and archives, and as I mentioned before, that's something that I enjoy thinking about and digging into. Another part of archiving that people don't really connect with archival custody or care too much is the idea of ethics. But the archives profession is a very ethically charged profession. So if archivists willfully ignore, voices or communities represented in society because they don't agree with them or they don't think that's important, that's a pretty unethical thing, I would argue. If archives are providing access to information that violates someone's privacy and that has, negative repercussions on an individual's life, that's pretty ethically questionable. And so, every week in my 650 course, my Intro to Archives course, when we talk about different aspects of archiving, I can always connect ethics to what we're talking about in some way. So anytime a profession is charged with shaping how people are remembered and how history is represented in society, there's a lot of room for ethical shenanigans to take place, and that's certainly an issue that archives have to connect with. And finally, one aspect of archiving that people don't necessarily connect with archives is the role that archives play in shaping social memory and supporting the formation of identity. So if you think about it, if you're a member of a community group and your community doesn't have any records represented in archives because archivists didn't think they were important, archivists didn't like your community, archivists didn't agree with what your community was doing or what they had to say, and information about your community doesn't survive into the future, that can really impact your ability to have a sense of place and have a sense of memory and have a sense of connection, with your community and with the rest of society. And a lot of the decisions that archivists make can determine which voices are heard and represented in society, which records are there for people to make documentaries and movies and write articles about, and which voices are not. And these roles can have this role can have a strong impact in shaping how people view an event or a community or a person or an organization. And so again, when you start thinking about that, you can see why it's so important for archivists to think about their role in supporting or not supporting social justice and the different ethical dilemmas that sort of come with that power. So yeah, what I really love about archives is that it is such a multidisciplinary, multidimensional field. And it's not just history. It's not just, people in rooms with dusty boxes. It is a very modern, contemporary profession that deals with some very important issues. And, I've been learning about, working in, or teaching about archives for like 15 or 20 years now. And, I'm still just so interested in archives, and I enjoy teaching about it so much. And I think that is because it is such a wide ranging profession, and one that really offers a lot of opportunities to look at and investigate different issues. And that's something that you'll have an opportunity to do as a student as you move through the Archives MLIS, and as you start to take some of the different courses that you can take in order to receive your Archives transcript designation. Okay, so next I will talk briefly about the MLIS as a whole. So as I mentioned, within the MLIS, there is the archives concentration, which is the main focus of tonight, but I think it's helpful to take a little bit of a step back and look at the MLIS as a whole, so you can kind of place the archives concentration within the context of the MLIS. So one thing that I want to highlight right off the bat is that you can take your entire MLIS and your entire archives concentration within the MLIS online. So if you never step foot in Milwaukee, although Milwaukee is a lovely place, you can still finish your degree. And we're really well versed on teaching courses online. SOAS was one of the pioneers of online courses. So it's something that we know and we do really well. Our instructors have a lot of experience teaching online. So it's definitely an area of strength for SOAS, and something that's really convenient for students as well. And you can do you can take a hybrid set of courses too. So you can do some on site if you're in the Milwaukee area, and you can do some online. You can do them all on site if you want, although that's increasingly rare. But there is a lot of flexibility for how you can take your MLIS courses, which I think is a pretty valuable thing. So for your MLIS, I'll talk a little bit about the curriculum. So the MLIS requires 36 graduate credits, of which 30 must be in the information studies or information science field. If you already have a master's degree or a doctorate, you only need to take 30 credits. So you got a little bit of a shorter experience as a graduate student. So that's great, just to recognize your prior academic achievements. I would say that's pretty rare from my experience, and most of our students are ones taking 36 graduate credits. But there are a few here and there that only are required to take 30 because of what they've already accomplished. So every MLA student has to take these 4 courses. So 501, 511, 571, and 799. So these are a total of 12 of your 36 credit hours that you end up taking. And I won't go into detail with them too much, but they're basically just designed to provide sort of a basic level of knowledge that every MLA student should have, no matter what concentration they're pursuing, if they're pursuing a concentration, which not everyone does. And then the culminating experience is 799. So it's a course that you take to sort of demonstrate all the knowledge that you have gained during your MLS courses up to that point. Fieldwork is a possibility. I'll talk about archives fieldwork in a minute. But yeah, so what's an interesting thing here is that only 30 credits must be in the library and information science field and have the info studies designation. So you can actually take you can take 6 credit hours that are outside of SOAS. So if you wanted to take a course or two from the history department or the women's studies department, students tend to take courses that are at least somewhat complementary with the MLIS field, but it doesn't necessarily have to be so. So there's a little bit of flexibility as far as what your MLIS will look like from that perspective. All right, so next I will talk about the Archives MLIS, which I'll bring up here, and just talk about some of the requirements and the different electives that are a part of this transcript designation. All right, so this is some admission stuff that I won't go over too much. This just talks about the 36 credit hours, the core courses that I mentioned. So that's 12 of your credit hours right there. Another thing that I should mention is that for all these courses, you need to get a B or better in order to receive your MLIS. And that is actually true for Information Studies 650 if you want to be an archives transcript student. So it's essentially, it is a required course for the archives MLIS, and you do have to receive a B or better in it in order to receive the archives designation. So it's sort of an additional required course for MLIS students that want to pursue the archives concentration. I teach 650. We usually offer it online and on site every semester. So there's a lot of opportunities for students to take it when they want and how they want to take it. And it's just, as you might guess from the title, it's a broad overview of the archives profession. So we spend 1 week talking about archives in general. We spend another week talking about the nature of records. And then for most of the rest of the course, we spend a week talking about the differing activities that archives engage in. So appraisal, which is looking at records and deciding which ones belong in archives. arrangement and description, which is how archives arrange records and describe them so that people can use them more effectively and access them more efficiently. Preservation, which is something that a lot of people associate with archives. Digital preservation, which I touched on, and all on down the line. We do spend a couple of weeks talking about legal and ethical issues, and also personal archives. We touch on social justice in archives, and we wrap things up with the discussion of community archives. So again, it's a really broad overview of the archives profession. Like I said, I've taught this course, probably 20 times at this point. Yeah, at least 20 times. So it's a pretty well-oiled machine. And like I said before, sometimes students come into 650 knowing a little bit about archives. Sometimes students go in having never really thought about archives or encountered archives before. But I have the course developed in a way that supports all levels of experience. And again, just kind of takes a piece by piece by piece look at archives, and I attach some main themes kind of throughout the course that tie everything in together in a pretty nice little bow, if I do say so myself. So that is a course that every Archives MLIS student has to take. And beyond that, you have a fair amount of flexibility in which courses you use to complete the required 15 hours or 15 credits of coursework in archives. So we talked about how these core courses for the MLS as a whole take up 12 credit hours. And then on top of that, your archives courses will take up at least 15 credit hours. So that brings you up to 27 credit hours of the 36 that you need to graduate. So again, what you do with the rest of those 9 credit hours, you have a fair amount of flexibility. You could take other courses within the MLIS. You could take other additional archives courses if you wanted. So you do get to kind of choose your own adventure a little bit, which I think is a good thing to give students that flexibility. All right, so again, within those 15 credit hours, 3 of those credit hours have to be Information Studies 650. And then you need to take at least 2 of these courses that we call foundation courses. So arrangement description, archival outreach, preserving information media, and advanced appraisal. And the reason why we require students to take at least 2 of these is because they give students, as you might guess, foundational knowledge about what archives are and what archives do. So arrangement description is like a fundamental thing that archives engage in. Outreach is a fundamental thing that archives engage in, and so on. And so we want students to have exposure to at least two of these subjects in order to graduate with their MLIS and archives, so that they're able to go into an interview and say, well, yes, I can say this about arrangement description because I took this course. So it's just a way that we try and make students as prepared as possible to succeed when they go out into the field to find a job. And then beyond that, we have what we call the elective courses. So these are courses that are still related to archives, but not as closely or as foundationally as the 4 foundation courses are. So courses like digital libraries, metadata, information literacy instruction, which is where you learn about how to teach people how to use archives and libraries. So again, courses that are attached to archives, but maybe not as closely as these foundational courses are. And you can take a maximum of 6 credit hours towards the concentration from this menu of courses. I will say that Dr. Forrest and I are always reevaluating which courses we allow students to take within the Archives MLIS. I mentioned community archives. That is a pretty recent addition to the list of electives. It will be considered an elective course. Digital libraries is a fairly newer one. Information literacy instruction. There are a couple of courses that we have our eye on for additional inclusion as electives. essentially we try and keep an eye on what's going on in the profession and make sure that we're allowing or encouraging students to take courses that are going to make them as prepared as possible to go out into the profession and be successful. So there's a course called Information Architecture, which we're strongly considering adding just because we feel like it matches really well with the skill set that students are expected to have when they graduate. So this list of courses is kind of under constant reevaluation, and we kind of adjust things depending on what we see in the field. I will also say that Dr. Forst and I are in the process of developing learning objectives for the Archives MLIS as a whole, just to make sure that we are doing our best to make sure that students are, again, receiving an education that's going to allow them to go and be successful. So we're still thinking about exactly what those learning objectives are. But we do put a lot of thought and a lot of care into what courses we ask you to take and what those courses are like. So I know Dr. Force always revises his courses fairly regularly. I'm always looking at how I can make my courses better. So we really are engaged with the Archives MLIS and how it operates and the different goals and objectives related to it. One thing that I also want to mention that I feel like we do really well is we have experiential learning tied into our courses. So for example, in my outreach course, I have students use a tool called story maps to build an exhibit. Why do I do that? Because it's important to know how to build an exhibit, and it's something that archivists are expected to know how to do. And also because story maps is a tool that we have found that more and more archives are asking people to know how to use. And so again, it just goes back to this idea of us wanting to have students graduate as prepared as possible to go into the profession and be successful. I know Dr. Force has his students in arrangement description, create finding aids. So, we want to try and mimic what you'll be doing as a professional as much as possible as you're moving through the Archives MLIS. Another thing that I like about the Archives MLIS, and obviously I'm biased here, but there's a strong level of flexibility. So other than Information Studies 650, you really have a lot of flexibility as far as which courses you take. So if you take 650 and you think, wow, I'm really interested in preservation, that's something that I want to pursue more, then you can make sure that you take Preserving Information Media when it's offered. You can take classes like metadata, maybe technology issues and archives, and just follow up on that interest. So you're not really shoehorned into you have to take this and this and this and this and then this. You really have a lot of flexibility as far as choosing what your program looks like. That's what we want. We want you to be able to sort of follow your passion and follow your interests within the archives profession. Okay, so I'll wrap things up here by talking about what I call the keys to success. And these are things that I have found that if students do these things when they are receiving their MLIS, they'll be more likely to graduate in a better position to find employment as an archivist. I will say that the archives profession is fairly small compared to a lot of other professions. Archivists are never the most well supported, or archiving is never the most well supported profession. So, oftentimes finding a position can be fairly competitive. And so a key to finding a position when you graduate is by separating yourself from other people that might be applying for that same position as you are pursuing your MLIS. And so again, I'll just share some of my thoughts on how you can do that and make yourself more employable when you graduate. Okay, so the first one that I'll mention is something that we already talked about, which is your courses. Making sure that you take courses that provide you with a well-rounded understanding of what archives are and what archivists do. So You're only required to take 2 of these foundational courses, but honestly, probably the more of these you take, the better, because you're going to have more foundational knowledge that you'll be able to carry into an interview and into your first heady days as an archival professional. Like I said, if you think that you're interested in working in a particular type of archive or as a particular type of archivist, then that's something that you can follow up with. So if you think that you want to focus on being an archivist that arranges and describes records, then it's probably a pretty good idea for you to take Information Studies 750, perhaps digital libraries as well, and metadata. So it's a good idea to kind of know what type of archiving you want to get into, and taking courses that as closely as possible match that ambition. And so, the idea here is that you do get a greater knowledge of what archives are and what archives do, and that's great and that's important, but it's also important that you be able to go down to have an interview with an archivist and just know what you're talking about, right? So there's, they walk away thinking, wow, this person, really knows their stuff, and we feel like they do really well here. So picking the right courses and also doing a good job when you are taking courses is a fundamental part of increasing the likelihood that is going to be your interview experience. Okay, the second key that I'll talk about is professional engagement. So there are a lot of professional archival organizations out there. There are local archival organizations that might be related to a city or a region. So for instance, here in Milwaukee, we have the Southeast Wisconsin Archives Group. They call themselves SWAG. There's the Chicago Archivists, the Twin City Archivists, and there are regional and national archival organizations as well. So for instance, here in the Midwest, we have the Midwest Archives Conference. There is the Southwest Archivist Organization. So there's in addition to kind of more local archival organizations, there are regional ones as well, and kind of where you live will determine which one you should probably get involved with. And then there are national archival organizations too. So here in America, we have the Society of American Archivists, and then Canada has one, and there are archival organizations at a national level as well. And within these organizations, there are a lot of different ways to get involved. So you can become an officer, you can become a president if you're really ambitious. A lot of times these different, especially local organizations, are looking for people that want to kind of step up and volunteer to help with some of the administrative duties. So that's a great opportunity. The Society of American Archivists has different sections or roundtables, which are related to specific aspects of archiving, and you can get involved with those too and become a committee chair or a section chair or a roundtable chair. And that's really great because, say, if you're interested in a very specific part of archiving, then you can meet and interact with other people that have the same interests, and it can be a great way to do some networking and also learn more about the part of archiving that really intrigues you. So that can be a great way to not only to learn more about archives, but to get some very valuable networking done as well. Another fun thing that I've done a few times is to be involved on a local arrangements committee. So, different archival organizations have conferences, and if you can be involved with, finding a hotel where the conference is going to be, setting up local activities for conference attendees to do, that's a really fun thing to do as well. And it's just a great way to meet other archivists kind of from your area and from other parts of the country as well. So there are a lot of opportunities to get involved. It doesn't cost any money to be an officer or to join a roundtable. You can get involved with the Midwest Archives Conference for free. You can get involved with SWAG for free. but it can be a really great way to do some networking and meet people that may be in the position to hire you in the future or recommend to someone else that they hire you, which in a smaller profession like archives can be a big part of the game. Okay, so we talked about thinking about the courses that you might take and thinking about ways to become engaged professionally. Those are two of my keys, and the final key that I will offer is professional development. So this includes going to things like conferences where you can. I know that conferences can be expensive, but sometimes there are smaller regional conferences. So going to conferences, attending sessions, learning more about archiving, meeting people at conferences, networking with people, that can be a really valuable tool. Going to workshops. So sometimes there might be workshops on a specific aspect of archiving. Those can be great opportunities to meet people that share the same interests in archiving that you do. And again, just kind of make those connections which might benefit you in the future. Another thing that I will talk about is a course that we offer here at SOAS, which is our Information Studies 759 course. So this is where you are matched with an archive and you go into that archive and you complete a field work throughout a semester. So for every 50 hours of internship that you complete, you receive 1 credit hour towards your MLIS, up to 3 credit hours. Typically, students do the full 150 hours in a semester and receive the full 3 credit hours, but it's not a necessity. And you can actually take fieldwork for up to a total of 6 credit hours. So this is a great opportunity to learn a lot about archiving, to learn about kind of the day-to-day experiences of archives. You know, it usually totals to about 10 or 13 hours a week during a semester. So, you know, you're there doing what archives do, and what better way to learn about how to be an archivist than to actually do it, right? So there's definitely a strong connection to developing professionally through fieldwork. Another great thing about fieldwork is, you know, if you do a good job, then whoever was your supervisor for your fieldwork, you know, they can be a great reference for you when you go out and you start looking for a job. And again, you know, they might know someone, or they might know someone who knows someone, and that can be really helpful for you when you're looking for a position after you graduate. We do also offer something called alternative summer break, which is where throughout the summer you agree to work in an archive for, I believe it's 30 hours. And it's a lot less sort of regulated than fieldwork is, and it's not for credit. But again, it's a great way to work in an archive and to build those relationships and get some professional experience. To go back to fieldwork, there was a student who did a fieldwork at the University of Minnesota, and they end up getting a job at their fieldwork site just this past semester. And, you know, if they hadn't done their fieldwork, then, you know, they probably wouldn't have gotten that job and they wouldn't have the position that they have now. So there's definitely a strong connection between doing fieldwork and increasing your employability in the future. Now, we understand that not everyone can do fieldwork because a lot of people have jobs and families and things like that. But if it's something that you can swing, then it's definitely beneficial. If you can't do fieldwork, I would say it's more important for you to try and focus on getting involved with archival organizations and you know, going to workshops and conferences to sort of make up for that as best you can. But yeah, if you graduate without having really thought about professional engagement and professional development, you know, you're going to have less to put on your resume. You're not going to be able to separate yourselves from other applicants as well as maybe you could have, and it's going to impact your ability to find a job in the future. You know, it's just kind of the name of the game, unfortunately. But you know, forewarned is forearmed, and hopefully it's something that you think about as you move through your archives MLIS or through whatever MLIS concentration you pursue, because library and museums is probably just the same thing. So definitely keep that in mind as you are moving through your MLIS. One last thing that I'll mention is that Dr. Forst and I try and do a good job of making students aware of different workshops and conferences and professional development opportunities out there, as well as scholarships. So throughout the semester, every couple of weeks, I send out an email to Archives MLIS students saying, hey, this is going on, or you can apply for this, just to try and keep you abreast of the different opportunities that are out there for you to pursue so that you can pursue them if possible, and be successful in the future. Okay, so that's really all that I have. I know that was a lot. So if you have any questions now, go ahead and put them in the chat. I will go ahead and put my email address in the chat as well, so that you can contact me if you want. So looks like we had a question early on. Are online classes synchronous, asynchronous, or a mix of both? Almost all the time they are asynchronous. There have been a few synchronous online courses in the past. I've actually taught a couple of them. I think that they're great. I think that SOA should do more of them. For whatever reason, there doesn't seem to be as much of an appetite for synchronous online classes. But that's something that I'm going to try and change in the future, because I think that they do offer a nice mix of flexibility, because you don't have to be in Milwaukee to take them, but also you have that sense of being in a cohort and interacting with people, in real time. So good question, but I would say 95% of the time they're asynchronous. Are there any other questions? Do we offer summer courses? Yes, we do. The curricular offerings for the summer are a little bit more limited, but there are some instructors that like to teach in the summer. I teach 650 every summer. It's an 8-week course as opposed to the normal 14. So things are condensed a little bit. It's a little bit more intensive, but that's typically true for a lot of summer courses. But yes, we do offer summer courses. Usually almost 99% of them are online though, because I think instructors like to be able to travel around and not be in Milwaukee necessarily, as wonderful as it is. Okay, can you speak more about the requirements to set up fieldwork? Absolutely. So all you have to do is fill out an application saying, here's what I'm interested in doing, here's where I live, and so on and so forth. And then I work with you to find an archive that is going to meet your wishes as much as possible. So I do try and find field work experience for students that are going to be useful. I don't want students to go somewhere and just scan records for 150 hours. I really like to see students being involved in policy development and more of the practical stuff that is going to, help them be an archivist in the future. And I would say over time, I've gotten a little bit pickier about where I send students for field work. So I won't say that I can get everyone what they want 100% of the time, but I do have a pretty good track record, and I feel like I have a good track record of finding fieldwork experiences for students that are actually valuable and will help them. Okay. So I've heard that if you want to be an archivist, it's pretty much essential you do an archives concentration with your MLIS. I'm wondering if it's the same in the other direction. Can you work in a library information fields if you have an archives concentration, or could having that concentration close doors for non-archives jobs? You can work in libraries even if you have an archives concentration. I've known a lot of my students that have gone on to work in archives with no problem at all. So yeah, as you mentioned, You do need the Archives MLIS to work in Archives, but if you have an Archives MLIS, that will absolutely not stop you from getting a job in a library or any of the other information institutions in the future. So that is a very good question, and thank you for asking. For fieldwork, are locations you send students less likely to agree to take on a fieldwork student if they're doing less than the 150 hours? That's a good question. I haven't found much blowback based on the amount of hours a student wants to work in the past, especially if a student is planning to work 50 hours one semester, 50 hours the next, and then 50 hours the following semester. As I mentioned, most students just take the full 150 hours for the 3 credit hours. So I can't say there have been a lot of instances where I've had to ask employers if they're willing to take someone just for 50 hours over the course of the semester. But when I have done that, there hasn't been any pushback that I can recall. But good question. So many good questions tonight. Are there any other questions? Can fieldwork be done anywhere like Canada? Yeah, absolutely. I don't see why not. I actually used to lead a study abroad to Canada to kind of talk about the contrast between Canadian archives and American archives. So I have a little bit of a soft spot for our Canadian archival colleagues, and yeah, I don't see any reason why that wouldn't be a potential occurrence. What opportunities are there outside of academia? Do you mean for archivists, or could you clarify that a little bit? For the archives constraint. Oh, do you mean outside of working for academic institutions like universities as an archivist? Ah, yes. Yeah, there are a lot of different organizations that have archives. So many corporations have archives. A lot of different religious institutions have archives. Um, there are a lot of community archives out there, kind of more and more. That's becoming a way that archives are able to find employment. So definitely, you know, cities and states have archives. So yeah, you know, there a lot of them are more focused in institutions, but there are definitely a lot of non-university archives out there. You know, here in Milwaukee, we have an archives at the Milwaukee Art Museum. We have the Milwaukee County Historical Society. We have the Jewish Milwaukee Museum has an archive. So yeah, just within Milwaukee, I can think of, you know, a handful of examples of non-university archives that that we have had field works with and students working at in the past. No, there is no capstone project required for graduation. All you have to do is finish 799, which is one of the 4 required MLIS courses, and that's considered your capstone. It used to be different, but they changed it, so it's just 799 now. There is the thesis option if you want to write a thesis as a part of your MLIS, which I didn't touch on too much because not a lot of students pursue that field, mainly because you have to take 39 credits instead of 3. So you know, it's a little bit of extra work. I would say if you're planning on going to get your PhD, at some point, in an archival, like intending to, teach about archives, then the thesis option might be a good one. But I would say it's pretty rare. You are welcome. All right, any other questions? As I mentioned, I put my email address in the chat. So if you do think of anything that you didn't think of to answer or to ask tonight, sort of later on down the road, maybe you're tossing and turning, you're like, oh, I should have asked that. It's not the end of the world, friend. Just send me an email and I'll be happy to reply to you. Also, if you're interested in learning more about any of the courses that I talked about, I can definitely send you a recent syllabus so you can take a look at just some of the more specifics of some of our courses. I'd be happy to send you a 650 syllabus, for example. Really, any information that I can provide to you, I'm more than happy to do so. I really appreciate the fact that you are here and you're sort of interested in learning more about your potential options to the future and that you're really doing your research. And yeah, I think that's great. So do you think there are any areas that someone wanting to focus on digital errors and archives should still make sure not to miss to stay well-rounded? Yeah, so definitely preserving information media. A lot of that is focused on digital preservation. So that would be a big one that I would say don't miss. Certainly, metadata is a big one related to digital records. So that as well. Arrangement and description in archives. I'm sure Dr. Forrest talks about arranging and inscribing digital records, which is different from analog records. So pretty much every course in archives is going to touch on digital archives to a certain extent. But yeah, I would definitely say preserving information media and metadata would be really good ones for you to take if that's an area of archiving that you're interested in. And also trying to do a field work that you'll be working with digital records as well, I think would be really useful. And I can help make that happen. You're welcome. Another great question. You just some great questions tonight. I think these are the best questions I've had in any information session that I've done, and I've done a few of these now. So just I'm very impressed. All right. Well, it's just about 8 o'clock here on in good old Milwaukee. Kind of a rainy, cold night. Hopefully, the weather that you're experiencing is a little bit nicer. But I think we'll go ahead and call it a night here. Definitely feel free to email me with any questions that you might have. And again, just thank you so much for taking the time out of your evening or night, I guess, depending on where you are, to join me and to join the rest of us. And take care, and I hope I hear from you soon. You're very welcome.